The Joe Rogan Experience.
The Manson family is a fascinating one, right? Because I know that you have studied Jolly West
Mm.
and the whole MKUltra program and what they were experimenting with psychedelic drugs and cults and mind control. Um, do you what is your perspective on why they were doing that?
Why?
Why
Why
Jolly
MK?
West was involved? Why were they involved? What do you think was the initial motivation to sort of pursue mind control studies? The federal
Yeah,
government.
I think the initial motivation was a kind of national internal emergency, national security emergency that emerged right after World War II, actually at the beginning of the Korean War, when U.S. Pilots were coming back or were shown confessing to having flown germ warfare missions over China, and then many POWs were coming back and seem to have been converted to communism or have been concerningly affected by something that was seen as brainwashing so many of the soldiers coming back seem to have been brainwashed or have collaborated to some degree when they were held as prisoners. And then there were 21 U.S. POWs who elected to stay in China, and this really was a disturbing. They all had a chance to choose when they were in the UN camps after they'd been held prisoner for 4 years or so, and 21 of them decided that they'd like to try their lot in China. And so this caused this kind of collective, caused a crisis of, did the communists possess a super weapon of some kind that no other war. There was even a famous article in the New Yorker that said something new in history, that there was some capacity that this ideological system had, the communists had, that was somehow rendering Americans powerless against it. So this was kind of the crisis of mind control, and MKUltra was an attempt to basically reverse engineer what this was. So Jolly West was one of the first people. He was in charge of studying the brainwashed pilots initially, and that's how he.
What year was this?
That was in 1952. But he also, before that, he was involved. I mean, he had been trained to some degree with. He was trained by Harold Wolff, who was at Cornell. He had done his residency at Cornell with Dr. Harold Wolff, who is a world neurologist, a world expert in migraine and basically the type of pain that comes from migraine. So you could say he was an expert in the fear pain cycle. And he had CIA connections from even before MKUltra was started.
So what did they determine the Chinese were doing?
So they determined, West wrote a paper in 1957, and the part that was published in a journal called Sociometry described he described it as DDD, or debility, dependency, and dread. And he said basically these camps were systematically inducing a state of debility, which was that soldiers were starved and basically worn down. They were deprived of medical care. This is also in the historical record. Something I studied extensively is that, men were marched in, for example, the Tiger Death March north of the Yalu River from the war, where they'd been captured. And by the time they got there, they'd often lost half their body weight. They had been bombed by their own forces at night. They sometimes, they had to pour the blood out of their boots every morning just to keep going and not be. Anyone who stopped would be shot. So by the time they got to the camps, they were really worn down. And a missionary who passed them in a train at that time wrote or described in an oral history that he didn't recognize them as Americans, that they were the most bedraggled. That it was just they were in a terrible state. And so debility was the first thing West described when he was extracting what had happened. Dependency was, later there was a layer added in which the POWs were dependent for all if they were going to survive, they required the camp leaders would provide it, so it made them very dependent. And they also engaged in very formal Maoist thought reform with the men as a kind of experiment. And the third part was dread, which was just the idea that you could be killed at any time, or perhaps your family could be, because they threatened the
Maoist
family.
thought reform?
Yeah, that in the POW camps, the Chinese, once the Chinese took over from the Koreans running the camps, because they decided, I think it was almost a formal experiment, at least that's how it looks to me. I don't think West wrote about this, but in my own research on the camps, it transpires that they wanted to see, because Mao believed that thought reform would work on anybody, not just on Chinese people, not just on Chinese peasants. He felt that only something like 7 to 8% of the human population was unreformable, and those people would be disposed of. But he wanted to check if these American soldiers would also be susceptible to re-education. So they really did a formal, 3-part re-education program on them. And men had many different responses to it. But when West met them, he studied many of the returning men when they came back to Lackland Air Force Base, and he extracted those three components of what had happened to them, DDD, and that's the way he became an expert on what he called brainwashing or coercive persuasion.
So how do they go from that to like sponsoring the Manson family and Operation Midnight Climax and all the crazy stuff that they were doing?
Yeah, it may seem like a leap, but I mean,
sort of.
It's sort of a leap, but it's sort of not. I think that MKUltra was funded around in direct response to this crisis of the POWs, and in addition to reverse engineering what had happened to them, they also wanted to turn it into a weapon and continue certain programs in interrogation procedures and making them more effective. So MKUltra just had a wide reach, and it was pretty free reign. It was a free reign program, and the historian Alfred McCoy says it was modeled on the Los Alamos in a way, a kind of Manhattan Project for the mind. So just as the atom had been disassembled and transformed into this new world had emerged from that program, that intensive exertion of scientific acumen, the same thing could be done with the mind. The mind could be sort of pulled apart, and human consciousness and functioning could be people could be broken down and rebuilt.
Were they trying to optimize the use of the mind to their advantage? Like, what was the end goal that they were trying to do with this?
A couple of things. I think one idea was it potentially could be a weapon. One goal. Another, so it could be used on an enemy, perhaps even a city. So that's one reason they were researching LSD. It had certain properties that made it could be easily dispensed to an entire population through the water supply. So they wanted to know what exactly are the properties of LSD. People didn't really know at the time. So there was an offensive part of it. There's also a defensive part. So U.S. military needed to be trained to resist whatever this was. Once they understood it, they developed the SEER training, and West was involved in that as well. And then a third thing was maybe a broader curiosity about, which would lead you to be able to interrogate people better, and perhaps also to, just really understand. I think there was also kind of a curiosity about what would happen. I think because they had so much power to experiment in a way without any oversight. And it wasn't until 1963 that the Inspector General of the CIA himself said, this is unethical, and we've done it. Basically put a stop to it. But it really was
63.
Yeah.
But it went on. I mean, the Harvard LSD studies. When were those?
I don't know which ones exactly. There were some that were earlier.
What are the ones that made Ted Kaczynski?
Okay, that's earlier.
Was that earlier than 63?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's Henry Murray. Yeah. But So I don't actually know the answer to that question of exactly how it continued, but they officially discontinued and destroyed all the records. So they may have continued under other forms.
But Manson was 69?
Yeah, so Manson is after that.
So they didn't discontinue it. They kept doing things.
Well, West kept working.
Yeah. It's ironic because it seems like they were kind of a cult. Because the amount of power, the amount of unchecked power and influence that Jolly West had and MKUltra in general had, and all the people that were working on this, you have this power, the fact that you are working in complete secrecy, you are the puppeteer, you're controlling all these people, and then this idea that have you read Chaos, the Tom O'Neill book?
Yeah.
What did you think about that?
I thought it was great research.
Amazing.
Yeah, it's a really good book.
And just so stunning.
Yeah.
I had never considered that before. I thought Manson was a crazy guy and he got together with a bunch of crazy people and he ran a cult. I have no suspicion that the government was involved in orchestrating the entire thing.
They may not have been. I don't think Tom O'Neill thinks that he made an absolute link. He just you do get West in the same room, potentially the same.
You get West visiting Manson in jail.
I don't remember that.
Yeah, West visited Manson in jail.
Mm-hmm.
West, he believes, at least Tom O'Neill does, supplied him with LSD, and then every time Manson would get arrested, he would get released.
This is true, but this wasn't West necessarily. This was Roger Smith, who was West. He was an associate of West, and West was head of the methamphetamine research project or things which was West got funding to do his hippie lab, or his psycho lab or psyche lab in 67 and 68 during his sabbatical in the Bay Area, and it wasn't obviously funded by this. If it was funded by the CIA, it was clandestine, but there are many notes that Tom O'Neill also writes about. So both of us have gone to the West papers over many, many years, and I think you can put West at the Haight-Ashbury Free Medical Clinic, where he had an office and where Manson would go for medical treatment, and his girls. He would take his girls in to be treated, his women, his cult. And they were, at the time, as I understand it, seen as a kind of a model cult, and many of the researchers under West, I mean, we can prove that link, that people like Alan Rose, who was a sociologist, they were trying to do an ethnographic study of cults. Mm-hmm. And what is the natural environment? How do they create bonds? And what is their relationship to American society and to drug use and things like that? So West would apparently hang out on the couch, getting high and wearing, kind of dressed up in hippie garb, with his middle-aged friends. And these graduate students and an undergraduate who he hired would be writing in their journals about how irritating he was. But sometimes it seems like it wasn't very targeted, and it wasn't very efficient, and it wasn't really there didn't appear to be a plan, which isn't to say. So to me, it's not entirely clear what the relationship was with Manson. It is very evident he was bailed out several times by Roger Smith, who was also a psychologist as well as a parole officer. So that's highly suspicious. And Roger Smith did know West. And Dave Smith, who was the head of the medical clinic, also knew West. But these things it's hard to tell exactly how it was
coordinated. I appreciate you being cautious about it. Yeah, that's good for you. I'm less cautious. Yeah. But I think it's also that is how the government functions in general. The idea that they would be so inefficient at everything except cults is kind of silly. I mean, it's a deep question. Yeah.
Is it clownish, or because if you look at some of the other MKUltra operations, they look highly inefficient, and they're dosing each other at the holiday party with the punch, and just many lives ruined while at the Operation Midnight Climax. It just looks like a free for all and out of control. But there are really concerning aspects of the Haight-Ashbury operation, I would definitely say. And Manson was, he could have been also an informant.
Well, he certainly was, I'm sure.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure. I'm certain he was connected. There's no way he just kept getting out of jail the way he got out, and the sheriffs who arrested him were told that it's above their pay grade.
Exactly.
Yeah.